Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today's Friday, it's usually McFarlane Day, but we are all done with our McFarlane reviews. I hinted at a new artist that we would be premiering today on this review, and here we are. So we are looking at Greg Capullo, probably best known for his Spawn stuff. That's where I discovered him originally with the fill-in issues he did on that title. I really wasn't into his stuff. It had more of a West Coast hatching kind of look originally, and I was just really kind of pissed off that we weren't getting the McFarlane artwork. But over the course of just a few issues in Spawn, he kind of won me over. His style became a lot more dynamic, a lot more intense. Similar, obviously, to the kind of dark, foreboding horror look that McFarlane had started to establish on Spawn. And the fact that McFarlane was inking him really helped kind of translate that McFarlane aesthetic on top of his pencils, where eventually, you know, you kind of had a hybrid of both styles that worked really well for me. You had the McFarlane aesthetic combined with, you know, the Capullo, I would say, better anatomy and better composition overall. And, you know, really, he became one of my favorite artists at that point, surprisingly, as opposed to how much I didn't like him at first. But then, you know, you find out that he did get his start before Spawn. He was on X-Force, right? And once all the Image guys moved over to their creator-owned stuff at Image, he was given the task of doing X-Force. I've got those issues as well that I'm going to be reviewing. And before that, he was on this title, QUASAR. So really the only reason I would ever buy QUASAR is because of the art, and in this case, because Greg Capullo's drawn it. Not an interesting character to me, kind of a C, D, E tier character. But again, the focus here is going to be on the art. I don't see a signature on the cover unless I'm missing something, but I really do feel like this is actually Greg Capullo's art on the cover as well. There's a few telltale signs as far as the anatomy goes, and some of the stylistic things that he does. The aesthetic might be a little bit different here, kind of a late 80s, early 90s Marvel House style aesthetic, but the underlying structure underneath is, to me, unmistakably Greg Capullo. And of course, that'll be even more obvious probably in the interiors that are credited to him. So this is QUASAR issue number 18, January 1990. This is his first issue on the title. Not sure if this is his first mainstream work, but pretty darn close. Maybe his first work for Marvel. He may have done some stuff before this. I think there's like a Daredevil What If story that he did. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But enough talk about that. Let's crack this guy open, have a look inside. So I will be focusing again mostly on the art just because the story seems pretty boring to me as I started reading through it, and not a lot of interesting stuff maybe for an artist to do. So I'll focus on those parts of the comic that do have more interesting visuals. So the book starts off with a pretty boring splash page, to be honest. If you're going to start off with a splash page, you would think usually you want to make something, you know, or draw something or grab the reader's attention with something pretty exciting. Not sure that's what's going on here. We've just got our main character QUASAR, or Wendell Vaughn. Kind of hard to make a guy called Wendell Vaughn cool. Just coming towards the camera, basically coming towards us in the foreground. I mean, draftsmanship-wise, Capullo's already doing a great job. You can see here in creating the setting, right? Layering it with the houses and the trees and the kids in the background. All that stuff works really well. Even in the face, I do feel that there's some of the telltale stylistic things that Capullo does, but it's kind of dampened, I guess, by the Marvel kind of house style inking, late 80s, early 90s Marvel house style look. And that's due to the inker. Let's talk about the credits. We got Mark Grunwald on the story. Greg Capullo is the penciler. Keith Williams is the inker. So maybe Keith Williams, an artist, I think, that has a slightly rougher, almost kind of Neil Adams type of inking that doesn't necessarily suit Greg Capullo the best. Not that he's done a bad job here, but I don't think it's necessarily the best match art-wise. Janice Chang letterer, and Paul Becton is the colorist. So yeah, like I said, this issue is pretty much writer driven, and there's a lot of kind of boring domestic stuff going on, so I'll get through that stuff a little bit faster and maybe focus on the more interesting aspects when it comes to the art, right? Because as you'll see here, man, it's just a story of Wendell showing up and to his family home, and you know, meeting his meeting up with his sister and his mother. So it's a pretty domestic kind of story here. Just art wise, again, I feel like Capullo's probably still using photo reference here and there, maybe more so for the ladies and the angles and stuff. There's things where I don't feel it's still a little bit amateurish, these faces here. When it comes to Wendell though, or QUASAR, I do feel a lot of the stuff that he still does today, kind of the highlight of the cheekbone here in the profile, the top lip, is still stuff that he does today, just more detailed and more refined. So his male figures, you know, a lot of the stuff that he's, you know, if you look at the Batman stuff he did, Bruce Wayne has a similar kind of facial structure to what we get here with Wendell Vaughn or Quasar. But yeah, just not super interesting art-wise because it's a pretty domestic story, at least up until this point. You know, all the artists, I guess, at some point looked at the Art Adams grid background and started incorporating that into their artwork, right? And I would assume even Art Adams probably got it from someone else that, you know, lost that influence is lost to the sands of time. But we know McFarlane used it a lot, Rob Liefeld used it a lot, and now even Greg Capullo is using it. So there are some shots where I feel he hasn't just quite developed yet his style for the ladies. Looking at this issue here, so, you know, almost looks more masculine somehow here than feminine, except for maybe the hair, and then back to a bit more feminine here. But yeah, these aren't the interesting bits. So Quasar meets up with this kid here and goes out to his garage where the kid shows him all these drawings he's done, all these superheroes he's created, right? And basically what this is almost like, you know, Wendell's had dreams of being Quasar. It's almost like he's forgotten that he's Quasar, and this kid is kind of jogging his memory with all these sketches. And like I said, just not a lot of interesting stuff going on. You know, structure-wise, composition-wise, I think he's doing a great job, but the inking, to me, just doesn't complement Capullo's artwork as much as later artists or inkers would. There's just kind of a disconnect, I feel between the two styles that make it look a little bit amateurish, or at least not as exciting as his artwork would become in the future. I mean, again, you're dealing with a character in Quasar that's not very interesting to start off with. So, you know, is this kid supposed to be like some sort of kid version of Stan Lee or something? I'm not quite sure there. But yeah, so we're living in this world, I guess, of just normal reality where superheroes don't actually exist up until the point where Quasar is going to remember that he is Quasar. So again, focusing on the art, little things, this down shot here, this bird's eye view, again, I think is done pretty well. It's in the finishing and the aesthetic that I find the artwork lacking in this issue, right? Just very simple, bare bones kind of stuff that, you know, I don't think Greg Capullo would do on his own. I feel like that's mostly the inker doing that here. Another masterful bird's eye view here. Ads for the Marvel Universe cards. So this would be around the time where just before I regularly started collecting comics when I was a kid. I've mentioned it before that I really did, funny enough, start off with these Marvel superhero cards, and then from there got more interested in Marvel comics and started buying them regularly, and eventually moved into Image Comics, right? So pretty close to my intense comic collecting days here. Not quite there yet though. Don't know if Quasar would have been a book I looked at that time with the level of art and the interest in the character that is not really there. Yeah, just some stuff here, like this shot, you know, very abstract, but it almost feels like it was done very quickly, not very successful. Not quite sure what it's trying to depict here. Naked Quasar, some Kirby crackle, like just maybe the inking is to blame, but this was just done very quickly. And even this representation here real quick of the kid's nose and glasses is just kind of odd, kind of an odd shape that you don't recognize right away. So where I find overall the storytelling, compositions pretty effective and easy to read, this one was just a kind of an outlier shot that I think is just not so great. So Wendell goes to bed, mom kisses him goodnight, and like I said, this pretty domestic, boring story here. You know, I don't know how interesting this would have been for Greg Capullo to draw, but I still feel like he's putting his all into it, into the compositions and the backgrounds and stuff. You know, starting off, you really got to lay it on thick and I guess not rock the boat too much and follow what the writer has established. So around here is where it starts to get interesting, right? So the kid brings Quasar to his grandma here. And again, so this is where the visuals get interesting. So the kid revealed to be not an actual kid, but some sort of alien demon entity, right? That was trying to fool Quasar into killing the grandma. And why? Well, we find out that the grandma is actually the source of all this imagination and character creation, right? So it's not actually the kid, but the grandma. And what she says here, your costume just doesn't look as good in person as I thought it would in my sketch. Not a great design. Just harkens back to, you know, Flashdance in the 80s with the headband and stuff. So yeah, never thought Quasar was a very good design. She says, let me try something, and boom, what I would say is, you know, maybe one of the more successful drawings. Not that the costume design is that great. It's a little bit better, I would say. And she says that's better, more like Captain Marvel, right? So definitely similar to Captain Marvel's design. The one thing I like is the interior of the cape here. That's almost like, what's that character's name in the Marvel Universe? I think it's Infinity, or... Anyways, he's represented, basically his whole body is almost like a silhouette where you can see the stars in there. I think it's a nice touch here to a cosmic character like Quasar to add, you know, the interior of the cape, basically representing space. You know, that in the whole design, I think, is one interesting and very cool element. And, you know, like I said, pretty lackluster first issue for Greg Capullo, but that's not his fault. He's having to follow the script. Hopefully later issues of Quasar start getting a little bit better and more exciting. I know, again, this is a pretty down-to-earth story. I know there's some more cosmic stuff coming, which is probably what I'm more interested in, and visually, which will be more interesting to talk about in future reviews of Quasar and Greg Capullo. So, off to a slow start with Greg Capullo, but we will be reviewing the next issue of Quasar for next week's review on Friday. So thank you guys. If you're watching and you're still subscribed, I really do appreciate the support. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, helps us grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are, and helps us get closer to our goal of hitting that 500 subscribers, that official point where YouTube recognizes us as an official YouTube channel, starts helping us out a little bit with the algorithm. So everyone out there watching, thank you so much, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.